Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Weekend Bible Study. We feel for you folks who are buried in snow out there. Snow is pretty, but it wears on a person after a while. I hope you aren't suffering too much from cabin fever. I hope you got food in the house. I joked on the forum that the weather blokes are forecasting up to 3 inches of snow for us here, and we don't have any snow blowers or snow plows down here. Who knows? They may cancel school for 3 inches of snow. But we'll struggle through somehow. Look at it this way. If it weren't for global warming, it might be much worse. If you're snowed in, you have our sympathy, and we hope you have some hot chocolate to keep you warm inside. Seems we are getting increasing responses from the radio program. I'm not sure of the numbers overall, but I can tell by the number of emails I get. When a person goes to the trouble to look us up on the web, find the contact information, it's a good sign. And more people are doing that now than were a year ago. A warm welcome to all of you who are joining us as a result of the radio program. For your information, you can ask questions or make comments by emailing me at ron@borntowin.net. There's a long list of the books we have covered on the website, and that is the books of the Bible. And some of them have been put on disc in an MP3 format for information. The simplest thing to do is call the office on the toll-free number and ask what we've got. Because we've been doing this now for, I forget what episode this is, for over a year. I know that. It must be close to 70 weeks or so. And consequently, we've got a lot of information. So if you're interested, and if you have an MP3 player, give us a call. They'll tell you how to get it. One of the good things about this method of distribution is that you can stop the playback anywhere and talk it over there together. Or you can back up and listen to something again if it wasn't clear. That's the downside of live streaming and even of sitting and listening to a sermon in person. A lot of people have commented on the ability to listen again, go back and rehear it. One of the interesting developments is the roundtable we're including with the Sabbath live streaming. There's no way to do this with the Bible study because we are all in different time zones. Our friend in Zurich is sound asleep, while the Friday night gang in the Central Time Zone are still online and listening. So we keep on experimenting. I think we can, in time, do a lot with live streaming, but we won't abandon the weekend Bible study. Here, we conquered the time difference. We can't hug one another, but there's always the feast for that. By the way, don't forget Memorial Day in Branson. We aren't expecting a big group, but the fellowship is grand, and there is no better family resort than Branson. We have no questions this week, but we got some responses to a question I asked last week. So, throw another log on the fire, warm up your cocoa, and have another peanut butter cookie, and let's talk. Jim Cookman of Mesa, Arizona, decided to take on my question regarding the eastern border of the tribes as they were given their allotments in the conquest of Canaan. You remember we worked our way up through there, and different tribes were given different properties with the northern and southern borders prescribed, and of course the Jordan was the western border. But nothing whatever was said about the eastern border of the lots that were given to those people. Okay, Jim writes, Deuteronomy is one of my favorite books of the Old Testament. Me too. Thanks for going through it with the weekly Bible study. Regarding the eastern boundary not being mentioned, I think it is likely because Israel at this time would have been unable to control the boundary as far as it had been promised to Abraham and his descendants. In Genesis 15:18, where God said the boundaries would be from the Nile River in Egypt to the Euphrates in the north and east of Canaan. Quite correct. Later, when David was king and Solomon, they controlled the land all the way to the Euphrates. 2 Samuel 8:3, 1 Chronicles 18:3, 1 Kings 4:21. Jim said, I think at this time before crossing the Jordan, they were borderline having enough people to cover and control all of Canaan. Adam Flash of Calgary offered a similar suggestion. A couple of others did as well. They're all good answers. Now add to this the fact that when invading armies raided Palestine, they came from the north. Why didn't they come from the east? Take a look at the map. Logistics across that desert are a challenge to this day, much less in those days. Take a little thought to how do you supply water for an army across that desert? It's no trick to go right up the Euphrates River. You have water all the way. Then cut across in the north and invade Palestine from the north. So when you think about it, there isn't much but sand to the east of them, and no particular reason to worry about it at this time. And what was said about David, what Jim said about David, he was the first to actively disarm Iraq. I think back in those days, things got pretty lawless at times in different parts of the world. And it got to the place to where it was an annoyance to trade, and trade's very important. So David went to Mesopotamia, disarmed those people, and when the Syrians tried to pitch in and help the Mesopotamians, David whipped them too, set up garrisons in Syria. So he created across that whole land a Pax Israeli. Basically, what he means is a peace enforced by Israel, which frankly made life a lot better for all those folks. Well, that's all we have in communication coming my way from you this morning. So get your Bible open and your notebook ready, and we will start with Deuteronomy 5. When you have done a work as momentous as that of Moses, your last message must be what? I can't think of a way to describe it. Every man, woman, and child there, except for Caleb and Joshua, had been born under Moses' singular leadership. Then the ones that died off in the wilderness never had known Moses until he was their leader out there. But these people had grown up under him. Moses must have looked at himself and said, "What in the world do I tell these children?" For they were all children to him. He must have wondered. It was important to him to recount the journey thus far, and so he did in chapters 1 through 4. We've just been through all of that, and it's a little difficult, as you all have found out, to kind of figure out where you're at with all the geographical references and so forth. But it was important to Moses, and so, since he was the guy who gave him the speech, that's what he did. But now in chapter 5, he turns to the importance of the foundation of their nation, the covenant with God, agreed upon by all Israel at Sinai. They all said, what God says we will do. Okay? Moses called all Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the judgments which I speak in your ears this day, that you may learn them and keep and do them." Now, just one small note of the distinction between statutes and judgments. Written laws are statutes. The problem is that you can't write enough laws to cover every possible question that might arise as a result of that law. The Sabbath is an interesting case in point. He says, in the Sabbath day you shall not do any work, and outlines all this stuff. And then people have to ask the question, well, what constitutes work? Is it okay to wash my dishes on the Sabbath? Is it okay to cook a small meal on the Sabbath? Is it okay to use the microwave on the Sabbath? Every one of those things is a judgment, and judgments come in different layers. They come into personal layer where you get to make your own judgment. They come at an official layer where the judges hear a case in court and render a judgment, and so on. Okay? What is handed down to Israel, and we have the record of all of it in Deuteronomy, is statutes, that is written, laws that Moses wrote down after God told him what they were. The judgments that God made in regard to particular situations that arose from time to time, which have a lot more power than the judgments that we might make, but nevertheless, if they're judgments, there may be circumstances that alter the judgment in some way, and you can make those decisions. You're responsible for them. Okay. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. The Lord did not make this covenant merely with our fathers. It says not with our fathers, but what he means is not merely with our fathers, but with us, even us, all of us who are here alive this day. The Lord talked with you face to face in the mount out of the midst of the fire. Now this is really important. God did not mail the Ten Commandments in. He came before the people and spoke to them. It was essential. When you enter into a covenant, you can't do that in absentia. Nowadays we've managed to figure out ways in law that you can close on a house without actually being there. But I remember a time here in Texas when you couldn't. You had to actually go there and sit down and sign the papers and be present in order to do the deal, and that's what a covenant is. It's a deal. And so in order to make a covenant, you need to be in the presence of the person you're making a covenant with. Okay. So we made a covenant with God in Horeb, and he talked to us face to face. This is of great importance. He terrified those people. Some of them suffered weak knees and loose bowels. But you can't make a covenant in absentia. You can't mail it in. God had to be there, and he had to be there in a way that no one could doubt who it was. And having brought these people up to date in all this, Moses went on with what would be his final communication to the people. Now, I think he wrote this himself, not with his own hand necessarily, but with his own words. The fact that someone else wrote of his death is irrelevant in Deuteronomy. For example, as you go on down, it tells you Moses died and so forth. Oh, big deal. Amateur theologians will opine that Moses couldn't have written this book because it tells about his death. Never argue with people who think like that. It is a waste of time. Do you remember this little line from the book of Romans? Paul, in the 16th chapter of Romans, is going on and on about all the people. He says, greet so-and-so, greet so-and-so. Everybody knows, salute these people. And he said, then chapter 16, verse 21, Timothy, my fellow worker, and Lucius, and Jason, and Sopater, my kinsman, salute you. And then this little verse 22, I, Tertius, who wrote this epistle, salute you in the Lord. Then somebody says, oh, well, Paul didn't write this epistle. Tertius did. Now, most people would understand very quickly that Paul dictated his letters. Tertius was merely a secretary who took dictation from Paul. Who took dictation from Moses? We don't know. Doesn't matter. Speculating about who wrote Deuteronomy is fine for graduate students, but it need not concern normal people. This we're studying now is a masterwork, and frankly, it makes no sense at all to even argue that it was written by somebody else. That it was edited later, that somebody's penned in something about Noah's death. You'll find that this happens fairly commonly. The people, they'll write notes in the margin. In Greek, we run into this a lot. That some of the ancient manuscripts, people would write stuff in the margins of them. And somehow or other, later on, they got pulled into the text, and that's one of the complications of textual criticism of the New Testament. So that someone made a marginal note in the book of Deuteronomy, which made its way into the text, does not in any way diminish the authority of the book as a book of Moses. Verse 5, I stood between the Lord and you at that time, to show you the word of the Lord, for you were afraid by reason of the fire, and you wouldn't go up to the mount. No kidding. It's hard for us to imagine what that was like. Cecil B. DeMille did not come close, I am sure. We sit in a movie, The Ten Commandments, and watch that on the screen, and it's impressive. Of course, it could be done better today with all the special effects we can do with computers, but still, I have a feeling that I don't have any question, being there and actually experience it and feeling the sound in your chest as it rolled down that mountain would really be enough to put you on your face. Some of them who were hearing Moses on this day had actually been there. They were in their late teens at the time and a little too stupid maybe to be as afraid as their fathers were. That's, I'm sorry, but insulting you teenagers out there, but, you still have a lot to learn. Verse 4, again, the Lord talked with you face to face in the mountain out of the midst of the fire, saying, I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. I believe the French version says no other gods before my face. He doesn't mean that you can have another God if you put him behind him. It means you don't bring them and put them in God's face, which Israel did repeatedly in their history, actually moving idols right onto the Temple Mountain in the temple site itself. Don't have any other gods in front of me. Now let's not argue the point. The Ten Commandments here are described as the covenant. They weren't all the covenant, but they are the concrete slab upon which the rest of the covenant was based. So, here we start. God says, I am. You will not even think about putting another God before me. You shall not make any graven image of any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or in the earth beneath, or that's in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down yourself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Okay, what's this about? Well, in the first place, this is in no way intended to be an inhibition to art or artwork. You can draw all the pictures you want. You can make all the statues that amuse you. Just don't bow down to them and worship them. It is simply not possible to make an image of God. So don't even try. An illustration of this sort of thing also falls in some skits that Skip was wondering if we might do at the feast. He asked me yesterday, he said, what do you think? He said, I know we can't include God himself in a skit. We can't have somebody play God. He wanted to know, well, can we substitute an angel? Well, sure, why not? That's the way God did it anyhow most of the time. So we can do a skit that represents with an angel speaking for God to people on the ground. That's most of the angels came like men. As to the generational thing, he's talking about the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. It is if the second generation repents, they will be okay. It's limited to the generations that hate him. But you can easily see how. You've got a generation of people that hate God. What are their children going to think about God? And what are their grandchildren going to think about God? If they have that attitude, it's going to pass right on down, and you have to realize you are really damaging your own descendants. Verse 11, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. Now, I'm sorry we're not together where we could talk about this. I would love to be able to ask you questions, hear your answers, and kick this around a little bit, because this is really badly used. God is not his name. In Hebrew, the word is Elohim. And the sense of that word is judges, magistrates, governors, as Paul wrote, for example, in 1 Corinthians 8, verse 5, for though there be many that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many. But to us there is but one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. Now it is odd how hard some people work to confuse this issue. If the word God, and you have to talk about meanings, you have to define your terms, you have to say, well, what do you mean God? Well, if the word God in this conversation means only a supreme being, as you will sometimes see the definition, then how many can there be? Now, you should know that most of the arguments about the Trinity, the one God, the Arianism, and so forth are 90% semantics. There's only one being who is supreme, but that does not mean that the Son is not exactly like him, and that the Son is also divine. The Jews thought Jesus was claiming divinity in claiming to be not God, but the Son of God. They were right. And since the terms by which God reveals himself to us are Father and Son, I think we're free to think of them in terms of one family we call God. My old friend Charles Hunting used to say that if the devil can't get you any other way, he will waste your time. Arguments about the nature of God are basically time wasters. You should treat them that way. That doesn't mean I won't take your questions on this issue should you care to submit them. But the fact of the matter is that knowing the precise nature of God and how it all works is just simply out of our grasp and beyond our reach. We can't get there. I'm sorry. We don't have enough information. What we need to do is to take God as he reveals himself, right? He reveals himself as Father and Son. And that's the way we should think about them. Then he goes on to say in verse 11, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. Now, the way what this actually says is, you shall not take the name of Jehovah your God in vain, for Jehovah will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Frankly, I think some of the arguments about the sacred names fall into this trap and wind up violating this commandment because of the way they bandy the name back and forth and argue about the name of God. I don't think we're supposed to engage in arguments about how to call God. I can easily understand why the Jews did not publicly use the name of God, because they did so not because they dismissed the name, but because they reverenced it, and they wanted to be sure that it was never lifted up, which is what the word take means. It was never lifted up to no just end and was just simply bandied about. I encounter what I call two varieties of sacred name advocates. I call them sacred name light and sacred name exclusive. And I've known people who have gone out and been rebaptized in the Hebrew name of God because they thought their baptism in Jesus' name wasn't good enough. I don't think they realize what they have said about God when they do that, what kind of a characteristic they attribute to God because of that. The sacred names light, folks, merely believe there is significance in the name that is helpful in understanding some passages in Scripture, but they don't object to anybody using the word God, the word Lord, or that type of stuff. It's just that they think that the sacred name is important. Well, I agree with that. I am sacred names extra light myself because there are indeed places where the name is meaningful and it must be considered. But I see no reason to bandy about the name or to butcher the pronunciation in Hebrew. Jehovah is the English rendering of the Hebrew word Yahweh, and I am as certain as I am of sunrise that I'm not getting that pronunciation of that name right. Hebrew is not an easy language to pronounce. Now, why is this so? What is the silver bullet that kills the exclusive sacred names position? You want to press the pause button and talk it over? It's really easy. The New Testament writers, to a man, violate the sacred name exclusive position. In their own words, in citing the Old Testament, they substitute theos for Elohim and kurios for Jehovah. At this point, our forum, when we were talking about this, degenerated into absurdity as a couple of folks wanted to argue, well, the New Testament was originally written in Hebrew and then translated into Greek by the Catholic Church and changed from what it originally said. You know, it would have been amusing. It would have been funny in a way. But it was tragic. They did not even realize that if they were right, they couldn't trust a word of the New Testament. So my advice is, don't argue with people any further at that point. We had to close it out on the forum, but sometimes you have to let people find their own way. And, frankly, an awful lot of his definition of terms in any case. By the way, if you want to know what my discussion is about the New Testament, we have a series of radio programs. You can get them in an album form, Introduction to the New Testament. And it will help you understand, no, the New Testament was written in Greek, and it was written from all over the place, and no one ever had it under control so they could change it. Okay. Next in the list of the Ten Commandments comes the Sabbath commandment. Now, some people want to make something out of the differences between this account and Exodus 12. And again, this is graduate student stuff. This is not anything to worry about. My advice is take both of the commandments seriously. 40 years had passed since the words were handed down from Sinai, and Moses had a few other things to say about it that he hadn't said the same way before. Big deal. Keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. How hard is this? Get all your work done in 6 days and then take a day off. That's what God did when he finished creation. He worked 6 days and then took the day off. Was he tired? No. What, did he need rest? No. Why didn't he want to work on the seventh day? Because he wanted some time to look at his work, to enjoy it. I guess that's what he had in mind. Or he may have just done it to demonstrate to us how we ought to do. The fact is, we rest in solidarity with the Creator. And as I pointed out before, that seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord our God. And in the process of resting with him, we identify our God by name. The seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your ox, nor your ass, nor any of your cattle, nor the stranger that is within your gates, that your manservant and your maidservant may rest as well as you. Now, there is a judgment call here. I take it to mean that you are not to require anyone over whom you exercise authority to work. Just because you're not working, you're not supposed to take your ass out to work your ass either. I don't know how, if you're working your oxen, how you can not be working while your oxen are. You follow me? But the point is, God says, don't even make your animals work on the Sabbath. I'm glad he didn't say anything about dogs, because dogs have their work that they do, and they do it all the time. You know, they sleep, they eat, and if anybody rings the doorbell, they bark. And they're going to do that on the Sabbath day, too. So, it's a judgment call. I take it to mean, as I said, that you are not to require anyone over whom you exercise to do work. And the Sabbath was not just for Jews, by the way, as people like to say. It was for strangers. You could not hire a Gentile to plow your field on the Sabbath either. Now, does that mean you have to stop people from working over whom you have no authority? Well, hardly. If the civil authority wishes to require shops to close on the Sabbath, they certainly may. Nehemiah did at one time in the reconstruction of the walls around Jerusalem. People came on the Sabbath day to set up their shops here and there, and he told them to get out of there. He said, if you don't get out of here, I'm going to lay hands on you. So consequently, the civil authority can do that. And it was interesting. When I moved back to Texas in 1978, Texas still had a Sunday closing law that you couldn't keep your stores open on the Sabbath. It wasn't very long after that. On Sunday. It wasn't very long after that that law was repealed. It went through a couple of stages in the process. I know there was a liquor store over in Longview that was open it was split into two. It was already one store during the week, but on the weekends, they would close the door into one side of it on Saturday and the door into the other side of it on Sunday, so that they were able to have one part of their store open every day of the week. In fact, there were aisles in hardware stores where there were things you could buy and things that you couldn't buy. But again, that was all kind of ridiculous, so finally the Texas repealed the law. Now we come to a 21st century question that arises out of this. Is it wrong to benefit from the labor of someone who chooses to work if you're living in a non-Sabbath observing society, as we are? Well, Jews turn off the electricity on the Sabbath. I know there was a hotel in Tel Aviv where they turned off lots of stuff. They even set the elevator to stop on every floor so you didn't have to press a button on the Sabbath day. They light candles before the sun goes down so that they are not kindling a fire on the Sabbath day. Is that really necessary? Well, in my judgment, no. But I respect those who disagree with that. If you say a person should not eat out on the Sabbath, then the problem of electricity has to be answered. If it's wrong for you to eat in a restaurant where people are working anyway, food is being prepared anyway, it's a cafeteria, it's already prepared and out there. If you don't eat it, somebody will go to waste. So here's the thing. If you're not going to do that, then the question has to be answered. Why do you let your air conditioning run on the Sabbath day? Because someone has to work to provide electrical power to your community on the Sabbath. But here's the thing. Who gets to decide this issue? You do. That's the thrust of Romans 14, which really isn't about the right or wrong of Sabbath observance or diets or eating or vegetarianism or so forth. What it's all about is leave your brother alone on these issues. He gets to decide. Love him and respect him. So you make your decision, let him make his. That's what Romans 14 is all about. Just quietly consider yourself as more righteous and try not to make a big deal out of it. Verse 15. And remember, this is a continuation of the Sabbath commandment. Remember that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and a stretched out arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. For those who say that the Sabbath is a yoke of bondage, all I can say is this. Here is a people who were born in slavery, who worked every day of their life from daylight to dark 7 days a week until they died. And by and large, they didn't live to be very old. God brings them to Mount Sinai and commands them to take a day a week off from work. Some yoke, some bondage. And the connection to their slavery is not incidental. He wants them to remember what it was like to work 7 days a week and to learn the value of a day of rest in solidarity with God, a day that gives you time for God in your life. Verse 16, honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, that your days may be prolonged, that it may go well with you in the land which the Lord your God gives you. Now, mind you, this is not merely that you should speak well of your father and your mother. I'm honoring my dad. I think he's a great guy. No. It has to do with things like caring for them in their old age. Why should you do that? Oh, you should do this, that your days may be prolonged. How does that work? Well, if your kids grow up seeing you do this for your parents, that you give them money if they need it, that you provide for their house, that you go over there and take care of them, if you see to their needs, if your children grow up seeing that, they are more likely to do it for you. Your example speaks volumes. Verse 17, you shall not kill. You know, this is interesting. There are some rights established in this covenant. They aren't expressed that way, but they're there. This one is the right to life. You have no right to take another person's life away from him. He has a right to live. He has a right to live out to the end of his life. And not only that, but we expect children to take care of their parents to make it long. Verse 18, neither shall you commit adultery. This has to do, believe it or not, with the rights of children. One of the natural results of sex is children, right? We all agree on that? The integrity of the family is what is at stake here. If it weren't for that, who cares how often you have sex? It is the one and only thing that gives the state a right to regulate marriage and divorce. If it weren't for the children, why in the world should the state care who you're married to or live with or what have you? The state may have certain interests in it, but in protection of individual rights, but it's the children that make the difference. And since it is for the children, the state is required to care. Somebody's got to. And frankly, in our generation, sometimes you wonder whether the parents think they have any responsibility that way. Okay, take these two things together. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery. You realize that God is also protecting the rights of the unborn, which I think the state also has an obligation to protect. Verse 19, neither shall you steal. Thus is established the right to private property, because if there's no private property, you can't steal, can you? If something doesn't belong to you and somebody takes it, well, how can that be theft? Only because it belongs to you can it be theft. And it also establishes that nothing should be taken from a man without proper compensation. This lies at the root of our own law and the constitutional prohibition of taking. Verse 20, neither shall you bear false witness against your neighbor. Now, this is fundamental to our system of law. It isn't exactly about lying. If your wife asks you, do I look fat in this dress? It may be wise to consider her feelings and not tell her the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. If you're harboring a Jewish refugee in the attic, to take something more serious, it may be acceptable to lie to the Germans who are looking for her. In neither case are you bearing false witness against your neighbor. Now you should know this. Israelite law had the equivalent of a perjury provision, and it was harshly enforced. I'm not sure. I think we may come to this later in the book of Deuteronomy. But the way it was put is, if a soul sin and hear the voice of swearing. Now, they didn't put you up there to put your hand on the Bible and ask you to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. What they did was read out in the presence of all the people present the injunction to tell the truth. And if you heard it and you didn't tell the truth, if you knew and you kept silent, you're guilty. Okay, so they had this equivalent, harshly enforced. This employs another right that we enjoy. No man should be deprived of life or liberty without due process of law. And the Hebrew law says very much the same thing. Now, the 10th commandment goes to motive. In the first place, this is something that is entirely in your own heart and mind. Nobody knows that you're coveting something, do they? But if you commit an offense against society, these questions can go to show motive. Can the prosecution show that you coveted your neighbor's property? Neither shall you desire your neighbor's wife. Neither shall you covet your neighbor's house, his field, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's. Now, how can these be enforced by society? Well, they can't unless we act on them. But if it can be shown that we did covet our neighbor's wife, if it did shown we really did covet his manservant, and we broke the law somehow, then this could be used in court. That said, these attitudes, this covetousness, is corrosive and destructive to your character, and sooner or later you're likely to act on them. The word from this 10th commandment is, head these things off early, my friend, lest they nail you. Now, this is what Jesus was driving at in his comment on the 10 commandments. In Matthew 5:27, here's what he said. You have heard it has been said of them of old time, you shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. Here Jesus connects the command, thou shalt not covet, with the commandment, commit adultery. So you can easily see how this covetousness can run you afoul of all kinds of the other commandments, including lying, stealing, adultery, and the whole thing. He goes on to say, if your right eye offend you, pluck it out and cast it from you. It is profitable for you that one of your members should perish, and not that your whole body should be cast into hell. Now, what are we supposed to make of that? Well, I think in a way it's clearer when he says, if your right hand offend you, cut it off, because the truth is your right hand doesn't do anything of its own volition. Jesus is speaking metaphorically, speaking figuratively here, and here's what I take from this, guys. If you have a subscription to Playboy, and it's causing you to covet, get rid of it. Get it out of your house, cancel a subscription, stop it. Because if what you're looking at is causing you to offend in your heart, get rid of it before it finds expression in things that you do, because I think you can almost count on it, that if you continue to allow covetousness to sit in your bones, sooner or later, it's going to take you apart. That concludes the 10 Commandments. Moses goes on to say, these words the Lord spoke unto all your assembly in the mountain out of the midst of the fire, the cloud, the thick darkness, with a great voice. And he didn't add anything more. That's it. He wrote them in 2 tables of stone and delivered them to me. And this is the foundation of all morality. And it came to pass, when you heard the voice out of the midst of the darkness, for the mountain was burning with fire, you came to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders, and you said, look, the Lord our God has showed us his glory and his greatness, and we have heard his voice. We have seen this day that God does talk with man, and that he lives. Now, therefore, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of the Lord our God anymore, we're going to die. It gives you some kind of a clue of the impact of what had already happened. They might not have, but that's what they thought, the way they felt. Why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of the Lord our God anymore, we will die. For who is there of all flesh that has heard the voice of the living God speaking out of the midst of the fire as we have, and lived? Go near. Hear all the word our God shall say. I don't know why they didn't think Moses would die, but they didn't. And then you speak to us all that the Lord our God speaks to you. We will hear it and we will do it. And the Lord, now Moses is speaking, he heard the voice of your words, when you spoke to me. And the Lord said to me, I have heard the voice of the words of this people which they have spoken to you. They have done well in all that they have spoken. Oh, that there were such a heart in them that they would fear me and keep my commandments always, that it might be well with them and with their children forever. Two important things here. One, the heart had to be right, and there's almost a presumption that it was not right. Two, the law was not for God's benefit, it was for their benefit. That being the case, it's for the good of man, and guess what? That means it's good for all of us, not just for the Jews. Frankly, these people who want to say, oh, the Ten Commandments are given to the Jews, we don't have to concern ourselves with that, are probably a lot more concerned about being able to get in bed with their neighbor's wife than they are about pleasing God. So, God said, go say to them, get to your tents again. But as for you, Moses, stand here by me. I will speak to you all the commandments and the statutes and the judgments, and then you can teach them to the people that they can do them in the land that I'm going to give them to possess it. And I guess that's what we're going to get as we make our way on through the book of Deuteronomy. He says, you shall observe to do, therefore, as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or the left. You shall walk in all the ways which the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may live, and that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which you shall possess. And thus is the stated objective of the Ten Commandments. It's for us to live long in the land, that it goes well with us, and we have a good life. And if you read the Ten Commandments, you should be able to see very clearly that they help to create, they actually lie at the foundation of a just society and a just people. We're going to have some fun going through this, and I would suggest as your homework that you prop your feet up, have another cup of coffee, and read your way through the 119th Psalm. For nothing in the Bible is clearer about the purpose of the law and what it was given to accomplish than that psalm. Okay, that's where we are for today. We're going to stop there and not try to tackle chapter 6 until next week. We'll see you then. Until then, if you have questions or comments, write to me, Ron, at borntowin.net, and we'll talk again.